Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. So, as you will recognize if you followed the podcast for any length of time, I've taken a little hiatus. I've taken some time off, decided to pull back a little bit from some of the doing that I was involved with and just kind of be for a while. Still doing the things that I was doing, exploring me in nature and otherwise. And so now that we're back and going to be once again kind of delving into these things, and in fact, I'm going to add some things to the mix. I'm in the process of creating a website, and that's going to add to the way that I'll share this information. It'll probably at least 3 weeks out, maybe longer than that. We'll see. I've got all the parts. I'm just putting them together. So what I want to do with this now newest podcast, as we're back again doing things, is to add a component to some of the things that we've been talking about. And whether it's been in the audio podcast or the video podcast, of course, our foundation is always that we are much more than the physical body. We are the self, we are the soul, we are the oversoul, we are all that is. We are, in using other terms, Paramatma, Krishna, God. Let's see, goddess, whatever you would like to say, the great mystery. So many terms, right, for this idea of the infinite expression of who and what we are. And we are that. We are both an expression of that, having this experience, and all of that, having many, many experiences, some way, way, way too unfamiliar for us as we express ourselves in this way to understand. So, kind of in association with that latest statement is some of the things that I want to add here. So, as you follow this, of course, and through your own explorations, you're familiar that what we have going on here is us as the soul, us as the oversoul, creating this seemingly physical experience, right? Through what I've termed and others have termed before, the mechanisms of consciousness, the various ways that we utilize consciousness and energy to have this particular experience. And so, of course, we're not the only ones that are doing this, right? There are many, many, many others, an infinite number, of course. But what we're going to concentrate on are those others that explore themselves, create a portion of themselves into experiences that we could also call physical experiences, but whose physical experiences are maybe much different than ours are, sometimes maybe somewhat similar, all right? And those individuals, in terms of time, having, let's say, a head start on us, having done this, maybe started it earlier, or maybe didn't start from a place where we were quite so cut off, seemingly, from the rest of who and what we are. So a head start in that regard. And in that, they develop their awareness of self in a deeper way at this time, shall we say, than what we have so far. Although we're doing pretty well and we're expanding rapidly, of course. But those individuals, in expanding their awareness a little ahead of us, sometimes a lot ahead of us, of course, would then become aware of the rest of their own consciousness, which includes us, because we are, all of us, part of one consciousness. And so in that, they would investigate us, see what we were doing in our experience, and perhaps some of them lend a hand in various ways, right? And so in that regard, sometimes that lending of assistance shows up non-physically, sometimes in dream time, sometimes in messages that come through various ways that we symbolically represent that infinite us that lies within us, I guess we could say, whether we've called it various types of gods or goddesses or whatever we might say. So the information can come that way. The information has come in physical ways as well, through what we might call UFOs, right? Individuals who, in also creating and exploring a part of who and what they are physically, reach out then in a physical way through other physical realities, or at least That's the way we interpret it here, right? Is there's a physical interaction going on. And that's really, of course, what's important is the experience we're having. So how it is that we're perceiving and interpreting things is really what it's all about. So in any event, we've had throughout time, we'll call it, a number of moments when there's been interaction by individuals that we would call extraterrestrial, individuals that didn't begin on this planet in the way that we consider it physically, right? They've come from other places in that regard. Now, they may have come from those other places in ways that are not totally understandable by us yet. It may have involved things that are far beyond our understanding of how they may have got here. Maybe not to everybody on the planet, but to most on the planet. And so these are things that I've explored for some time now, and I've added to the mix of my exploration, especially in the last couple of years, a lot more intently than I had before. One of the things that's interesting in that regard is it's 2024 right now, and in March of this year, the government of the country I reside in presently, which is the United States, came forward and talked about some of the investigating that they've been doing into these types of things, UFOs and UAPs, they're called as well, for a number of decades now. And they released some of that information about what they have been finding in that regard. And of course, the thing is that for many years, individuals who've paid attention to this type of thing were aware that these types of things were occurring. And they occur in many different ways, of course. Of course, we have books, we have movies, things of that nature that many times we fall back on as to the models of what these things are all about and how they will play out. Many of these things, of course, we need to realize are quite limited by our understanding of the nature of existence. And so we convey those things through books, other types of media, movies, what have you, in ways that make sense to us. But as this information is being shared more frequently and more pervasively, it's spreading out more all the time. The information is there that, in fact, our model of how this will occur is a little limited in comparison to what it will actually be, what it actually really entails. Because, of course, what you understand once you've been on this path for a while is it really is a refamiliarization with the consciousness that you already are, the way that you already expressing your consciousness in ways that are larger than what you're doing right now. From this now, of course, you're connected to all of those other nows. You're connected to the rest of your consciousness. You're connected to all the other ways that you are expressing yourself. And so in that, the ability to have the information that lies within those other layers of you is always there. It really just takes broadening your exploration into those places and know those types of things. So in this regard, once you've explored this to some degree, in other words, this idea that there is ways that consciousness has expressed itself on, we'll say, other planets, in other solar systems, in other dimensions that also express themselves in a physical way, that because of their, we'll say maybe in this moment, advanced way of understanding consciousness, have become familiar with us and are much more familiar with their state of existence as the self, as the soul, as all that is, as the oversoul, as all those various representations of the way that consciousness expresses itself. And so they've been interacting, various species, I guess we could say, of consciousness, expressing themselves in various physical ways with us for a while now. And they've had impacts in various ways on us as well, which has to do with some of the variegated ways that we express ourselves around our globe. And not necessarily that I'm going to talk about a lot of that here, but just so that we know that there's a lot more going on within us, including genetically, than we have come to understand up until this point in time. So, of course, the idea is that as we, as the soul, as the oversoul, as consciousness, is all it is, as we express ourselves, as we have experiences of who and what we are in all these infinite ways, we do it in many, many, many models, right? We have here on this quote unquote planet become quite used to a particular model. Not really, of course, many times paying attention that that model has shifted and moved as the centuries and the millennia have gone by. And from a perspective of time, we can look back at that, shall we say, and we can see how that's true. And as we are allowing ourselves more information, as we explore who and what we are in a deeper way, we're allowing ourselves increasing information at an increasing pace of a history that we're finding on our planet around us that continues to express to us that there have been many, many more civilizations on our planet that are much, much older and have involved many more things than what we have typically historically thought of, quote unquote, in the past, right? And this is really all due to our allowance of our exploration into more of who and what we are. As we do this, we naturally become increasingly familiar with more of what we are, including our histories and the various ways our histories have flown, which means if there have been interactions with other individuals within that history, we will become familiar with that too. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the idea that regardless of what's gone on in your history, in our history, as I've alluded to just a little while ago, in order for us, in order for you to be familiar with that, it's going to take you residing, shall we say, in a particular state at that time, right? In other words, you are seeing your existence in a particular way. You are feeling about your existence in a particular way. You are believing about your existence in a particular way, right? And in that, it changes the nature of your energy, shall we say, right? The resonance, the vibratory state, shall we say, of the collective of who and what you are. In that, you will then naturally associate, be connected to, in an aware way, of things that match that resonance that you now have, that vibration that you now have. So as you change your idea of who and what you are, as you allow a wider perspective of the nature of who and what you are to become part of your experience, your day-to-day experience, that shift in how you consider yourself, that shift in the directions that you would like to go into, that shift makes a change. It makes a change in your reality. You now interact with things that you weren't interacting with before. And you will, of course, present it to yourself in ways that seem still to be fitting within the reality that you're in, right? This quote unquote physical reality that you're expressing yourself in. And so, in that regard, it'll show up as things that archaeologists has found, right? Or individual things that astronomers have seen now, right? Various things like that. There's going to be all sorts of information that'll start to show up in various venues that will reflect your allowance to move into a greater understanding of you, because that's really the key, is where are you in your understanding of you, of your desire to understand more of who and what you are, right? That's really what it's going to be about. It's not really about us, you, as an individual, as a race of individuals who are unaware of all this stuff, unaware of these deeper parts of ourselves, and then all of a sudden somebody shows up and shares all that information with us. That's not, I'm going to suggest, the way that it's going to play out, actually. The way it plays out really is as we become increasingly desirous of understanding more of who and what we are, right? Of folding those things into our experience, then those individuals that are already on that other side of things, shall we say, that are already doing those types of things in their reality can become more and more a part of our reality. It's kind of like in shows or movies like Star Trek, right? Where what they do is they have individuals who covertly go out and kind of observe various cultures to see where they are in their progression, right? Are they ready to become part of the Federation, right? Where are they in the way that they embrace peace versus war, right? Creativity versus destruction, those types of things, right? And so that's really the key there with us as well, is it's really always about that. It's about where are we in our understanding of ourselves, and how much more of that would we like to embrace, how much more of that, and in what shape and form would we like it to be part of our experience. Because you can, of course, become increasingly familiar with who and what you are without necessarily, at least immediately, becoming familiar with other ways that consciousness express themselves from other planets, from other dimensions, things of that nature. In other words, you don't necessarily have to be aware of your neighbors as you become increasingly aware of self. Now, that'll probably, I'm thinking anyway, at this point in time, only go so far because, of course, as you become increasingly familiar with consciousness, you would think that you would have to become increasingly familiar with all the ways that consciousness is expressing itself. And that would mean those individuals that at this point we term extraterrestrials, right? Individuals that show up in UFOs, UAPs, things of that nature. So there is that aspect of our reality as well. Now, for me, that particular aspect is an exciting thing. Having grown up, of course, with Star Trek and Star Wars, you've seen interactions of us with many, many other beings from many other places. And that's always been an intriguing thing for me. It's always felt like it would be something that I thought would be exciting to explore. What would that be like? Things of that nature. In that, of course, when you're here, in order to move in that direction, I'll suggest to you that even in this physical reality, what's important is to be as accepting of difference as you possibly can, right? If you really pay attention, there are many things even within your reality right now that, because it is different than your preferences, sometimes you can react very strongly to those things. And it's not necessarily that you have to leave what you prefer behind. It's just that you accept all things as somebody's preference, right? Whatever they may happen to be, because there's many, many ways of expressing themselves. And if we're going to interact with individuals who actually come from other places, even as our awareness of our own consciousness expands, we are going to be interacting with things, individuals that are very different than what we're familiar with, right? And so to be in a place where we can accept that, where we can accept those expressions of our greater self, right, that are living existences that are far different than our existence, we will need to become accepting of the differences that are around us, even in what we call our normal physical reality, right? All the various things that go on around us that are somebody else's way of seeing things, somebody else's way of doing things, different than ours, but to come to a place where that's all fine, where we say, yes, I accept that there's many, many ways out there to express. I prefer certain ways of doing it myself, but I express that and accept that other individuals have different ways of doing that, regardless of what it might be. There's all sorts of things that you may not like, and that's all fine. Just accept that it's part of the greater whole, right? Because those things will be important for you to be able to accept larger differences from aspects of consciousness that express themselves in ways that are far different maybe than what we do here. And of course, a number of those individuals, shall we say, if we're talking about extraterrestrials in that regard, and again, meaning individuals that weren't, as we seem to be, born on this planet, right? They come from another place, another dimension, another time, right? As those individuals interact with us, it will be more a psychological thing, right? It will be through consciousness, right? And of course, there may or may not, and there will, with a lot of them, be a physical manifestation as well. But it's going to be so much the other. It'll be so much what happens in our connection and consciousness is really the greater key to all of that. And so those are the things to really pay attention to. Where are you in your development of your own consciousness? And not only because of this, in other words, not only because it might be an interesting thing, an exciting thing to interact with individuals from other places, right? Interact from those expressions of all that is, from the oversoul, from the self, that have expressed themselves in different dimensions, right? Not only because of that, but because of what it will do for you, regardless of that, the changes it'll bring to your existence, regardless of those types of changes, right? The way that it can help you embrace yourself, to like yourself, to love your life, right? To express your life in the way that you would like to, right? So as the years go by, if you have some interest in this, because if you don't, these things will probably not show up in your reality, because of course, we're not living here in one reality that shows up the same for everybody. What we're living here in is really the same number of realities as individuals we have on the planet. Of course, that's fluctuating all the time. So we'll just say a large number of individual realities that, because we are all still connected, I guess I'll call it behind the scenes, all have a certain degree of similarity to them, right? In other words, we all live on this planet Earth, and this planet Earth has a large amount of water and it has a fair amount of land on it. And those land masses are roughly shaped particular ways, right? There's this stuff called air on the planet, these things called clouds, right? This phenomenon called wind, another phenomenon called gravity. There's this thing called fire, right? This stuff called ice. There's a whole variety of things that, as a overarching amount of information, form of information, most of us will align with, right? And then there are smaller things. Of course, there are cities on our planet, there are countries on our planet, there are states in certain places, provinces, whatever you might say. And as you move into more detail, the opportunity for things to shift and change and be different is greater in that regard, right? So as you move down into your personal life, you can find things that are happening that are very different than how they're happening with other individuals, because you are, in fact, as an expression of the self, as an expression of all it is, as an expression of the oversoul, as an expression of God, as an expression of goddess, as an expression of whatever you want to say, Vishnu, whatever word you'd like to use. You have no limitations in those regards. You have the same ability. It's all the same ability that's just being funneled through this relatively focused expression of who and what you are, right? So this smaller package of the infinite you, right? Still infinite, but just not knowing itself as that, having an experience as if that wasn't true, right? So you still express all those abilities through this you, right? Even though you're not many times aware of that from this perspective of you. So in that regard, of course, you're creating the reality that you're experiencing, right? And you're creating it in collaboration with many, many, many other expressions of oversouls, of all that is, of God, that also have an interest in having a physical experience, right? That's what you're expressing. You're expressing an aspect of you having a quote unquote physical experience, and doing it collaboratively with a huge number of individuals, a huge number of aspects, a huge number of focuses from your oversoul and many other oversouls that are also interested in having this type of an experience, a physical experience. Now, within the idea of time within that physical experience, and within the idea of this shift that we have inserted into our timeline now, right, where we have the opportunity once again, because things like this have happened in the past, there's cycles sort of, right, to once again have a much greater awareness of who and what we are, right, where the the awareness of who we are is not behind doors any longer, large, thick, bolted doors, shall we say. It's now behind very thin, very fine, very delicate curtains, shall we say, that are blowing around in a gentle breeze, right? And opening all the time. And these curtains even have many, many, many holes in them that we can see through easily, right? And actually, in this time period, we actually have to work now to keep ourselves unaware of who and what we are. Much more hard, shall we say. We have to put much more of an effort into that than if we would just relax. We would see more and more into who and what we are, because that's what this time period is about. It's about much more transparency. It's about allowing us to understand certain aspects of who and what we are beyond what we have done previously, right? Not things that others haven't done in the past, not things that others even aren't doing on the planet right now, but it's much more available now than what it was before, right? It's easily available if you have an interest. Now, you don't need to have an interest, right? If you're here listening to this, you probably have an interest, but you don't. And keep this in mind, people around you, as you're watching this, they don't need to follow this path, right? They may be choosing at all levels of themselves not to follow this path for a reason that you may never understand, right? That's not necessarily up to you to understand either. It's really about your path, right? And what you're doing for you and why you're choosing to do it for yourself, why those things interest you. But not everybody's going to make this particular shift, right? They may choose to look at things like many people looked at things in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and even the 80s, right? Where, yeah, maybe there's this stuff that's going on, UFO stuff or whatever it might happen to be, but, I'm not sure. I think it's just a story, whatever, right? And they're very focused on just this physical reality, right? A relatively circumscribed physical reality. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Many, many, many versions of the self have had those types of experiences because they are valid experiences as a physically focused being, right? So, but the opportunity is there. The opportunity in this time period, if what you want to do is to add this component to your exploration, to say, yeah, I think it would be pretty neat to become familiar with other aspects of consciousness while I'm expressing myself here on this planet, because the opportunity is there. Now, as I said earlier, a large part of that is going to be through the expansion of your own consciousness and a connection to those other aspects of consciousness through that expansion of your own consciousness. So that really is the key. It's not that you're going to be locked into this very constrained way of seeing things and then someone's going to land on a planet and help you move beyond all that stuff. That's not what it's about, right? Because if you haven't made certain strides in your own understanding, there would be no way to really have a conversation with those individuals. You wouldn't understand the way that they viewed reality, right? You just would not. Think about going back into maybe 1910 or 1890 or whatever with a current version of a mobile device or a cell phone, right? And all the things that you can do with it, right? And all the ways that you communicate, and trying to explain that to somebody from that point in time. That, yeah, I can talk and see somebody on the other side of the planet. Their concept is going to be, what kind of magic is that, right? And then they're going to try to figure out if it's bad magic or good magic, right? There's going to be all these ideas and beliefs that are very much a part of their world in that idea of time, right? Different than what yours is now because of all the changes that have gone on within this world, right? Within civilizations, right? That now flavor our existence in a particular way. And those things, of course, has shifted and changed as the centuries have gone by, sometimes the decades. I mean, if we look at the changes that have happened in the last 5 decades, a lot has gone on in those last 5 decades. There's been so much change as far as how we do things in our world, how close we are, how connected we are, largely due to this thing we call technology. But that's being, I'll suggest to you, supplanted by what's really been bringing it about all along, which is consciousness, right? You, us as spirit, us as self, right? And so in that, It's your exploration that is paramount. It's your exploration that's key. It's becoming increasingly familiar with who and what you are. That's really what it's all about, because the more you're down that road of understanding yourself, the higher your chances are to then interacting with individuals who have already walked that path in their own way themselves and are connecting with us now as individuals who are exploring that in our reality also. So that's really what it's about. It's about focusing on that. Sure, understand that these things are happening. This UFO UAP phenomenon is what's going on. There are individuals that are going to interact with us in that way. But in order to reap the most benefit out of that, what you're already going to have wanted to do is to have your awareness as broad as you possibly can, because that will facilitate that experience for you, right? Just like anything, the more you do that, the more information you're going to have at your disposal, and the more you can utilize that information, the more creativity you can use with the same type of information, because there's more layers of that information that show up for you then. Okay. So in that regard, as I move forward, as I move into other projects, these are things that I'll be folding into that particular expression, right? Now, as I said, through books and through movies and through many of the ideas that we've had, big ones being like, if you think of yourself as just the physical body, then this whole concept of death is a very real thing, right? And so there's many fears that revolve around that. And so a lot of those fears have been woven into those particular stories about individuals that would visit us, right? So that they would try to harm us, right? They would kill us because we have this fear of this idea called death, right? We don't believe in the eternal nature of who and what we are. And so there are all these types of hesitancies and fears and worries and stuff like that that have been wound into those types of stories. Understand, if you can, that it's really just because of the perspectives that, even though they still exist now, were much more prevalent 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, 4, 5, 6, whatever it might happen to be, particularly when people first started writing about these in the time periods that were a little closer to ours. Certainly there are things that were documented many hundreds and thousands of years ago, actually, when individuals explored and embraced some of the things we're talking about here in a much larger way. And in that, the interactions that they had were very nice interactions, right? And they would depict those interactions on caves or whatever it might happen to be in ways that they could, right? So that they could say that information so that other individuals, quote unquote, within the story of history, right, within the story of our civilization, could then find that information, and it could lend some influence to how we might look at that type of thing, right? So keep that in mind, of course. Keep in mind the ideas and the beliefs that we've had in our society for a long period of time and how they have colored many of the things that we've looked at. These interactions also, right? So we've covered those things, we've layered those things in with fear and with a need to defend and all those types of things because of the way that we have seen existence. We're moving away from those ways of seeing existence again as our consciousness expands, as we become increasingly familiar with more of who we are, right? With the actuality of what we have going on, with how much more we actually are than what we believe ourselves to be and what that entails, right? So I think for today, we'll probably wrap this up. As always, of course, I hope that your exploration is going very, very well. I hope that as you continue to explore who and what you are, you're allowing yourself to be guided by those aspects of yourselves in your exploration. And as you do that, you are benefiting from the fruit, shall we say, of your explorations. So we'll be talking to you before not too long, whether it's going to be in a video podcast or an audio podcast. And again, stay on the lookout for the website that I'm going to be creating. Again, I'll mention it to you guys when I do. And then what we'll do is, again, we'll expand what we're doing a little bit and share information in, again, just a little bit different ways, right? So again, take care of yourself. And I hope, as always, that you are enjoying your exploration. So take care.